Welcome to Wine Soundtrack USA. Listen to the passion with which producers narrate their winery and their world. In 30 answers, discover their stories, personalities, and passions.
Hello, friends and listeners of Wine Soundtrack. This is Allison Levine, and today I'm in St. Helena, California, in the Napa Valley, with Cary Gott, who is the owner of Vineyard and Winery Estates. Cary, welcome, and tell us a little bit about Vineyard and Winery Estates.
Well, it's a business I put together in the late 90s to help people get into the wine business. So my career has taken me from growing up on a winery, starting my own winery, selling it, then several decades of running large wineries for corporations, ended that. And now what I do is Vineyard and Winery Estates, and I have probably here in Napa Valley, Sonoma, Arizona, and in the southern part of California, created 40 or 50 brands and built probably 15 wineries.
Wow.
And it's, it's the architecture of the winery. And since I grew up as a cellarman in a winery at Sterling Vineyards, and then my own winery, Montevina, up in Amador County, I really understand the operations of wineries. Plus, I also currently grow grapes. And when I was up in Amador County, I had 160 acres of grapes that I grew. So my experience is growing grapes, making wine, and then creating brands, helping people create brands and operating them. And I still currently make wines for 4 different wine brands, and I'm getting ready to build another winery. So,
and can you tell us what those brands are?
There is Calla Lily Estate, which is in Pope Valley, in Napa Valley. There is Lauer Estate, and we have vineyards in Sonoma County and Knights Valley and in Napa Valley in the Calistoga appellation. There is Bressa-Dibble, which is in Windsor, and we have 2 sections of vineyard, about 60 acres of vineyard, and we have this beautiful historic barn. Well, it's not historic, it's an old barn that has beautifully been redone, and it's an absolutely stunning hospitality area, wonderful family and people. And then sort of at the top of the heap is Davis Estates, which I met Mike Davis in 2011, just after he purchased the property, and I've helped that organization make its first wines. I'm still currently the winemaker, and then we built this beautiful winery that's between St. Helena and Calistoga on the Silverado Trail. So Those are the 4 currently, but I could go up and down the valley and show probably another 10 different wineries that I've made wine for.
Wow. Quite a range and quite a history. And so it's kind of hard to ask you what the total case production is of your wines, but in those 4 brands, what are we looking at? Are they small production, medium size, large?
Of all of those brands, the total production is probably 25,000 cases. So
between those 4 brands?
Correct.
Okay, so all nice size and all about the same from each other. We can divide by 4 and calculate that. And then you mentioned you have estates. So are each of those wines all from estate fruit relative to where the winery is? Do you also purchase fruit from other vineyards?
In the case of Calla Lily, we grow all of our own grapes. They're in one vineyard behind the winery. It's a hillside vineyard. It's absolutely gorgeous vineyard, makes great wines. In fact, that's what's in your glass here, the 2016 Ultimate Red. For Lauer, we grow all of our own grapes, and there's 1 block of Cabernet that we buy from others. For Davis Estates, we grow a lot of grapes, and we buy a lot of grapes.
Okay.
And who am I leaving out? Bressa-Dibble. We're mostly just the vineyards, the 2 vineyards that we have. One is called the Kick Ranch, and one is the estate vineyard around the hospitality center. Total acreage there of grapes is about 60 acres, so it's a large collection of vines.
And for these brands and most of these wines that you're working with now, are these available all direct to consumer, or are they in distribution in multiple markets?
They're mostly direct to consumer and at the tasting rooms. Calla Lily has a small tasting room, but we're remote enough out in Pope Valley that we virtually get no visitors. Bressa-Dibble, Davis Estates, and Lauer all have tasting rooms, and they're quite busy. As the world opens up here, it's amazing the amount of business we're getting.
Oh, fantastic. Well, we're going to jump back to you grew up here in Napa Valley. Wine has been in your blood for a very long time. And I'm curious what your first memory relevant to wine is.
Well, actually, I grew up on Petrie Winery near Escalon, which is near Modesto in the Central Valley. And my dad was the general manager and basically the winemaker for this large, old Italian winery. And my first memories of that is a guy named Dante Foresti, who was an old famous chef from San Francisco, lived on the property, and he built me a car. And we had these massive areas where they parked the grape trucks, because with big trucks bringing in thousands of tons of grapes. And that was our baseball field. And then we lived on the property, and it was just great. I had an old Italian family, and a lot of memories there of growing up on a winery.
Wow, that is really an early memory and a great memory. So as you got into wine and you've been drinking lots of great wine, you've made lots of great wine. I'm curious if you're able to tell me one of those aha moment wines, one of those wines you tasted that, maybe kind of opened your eyes to the variety, to a region. I wouldn't say to making wine, because it might have been just in your blood that this is what you were going to do. But can you pick out one of those aha moments?
Think it's some of the early wines I made at Montevina in Amador County, because when we bought the property, there was a large acreage that had been planted incorrectly and the vines weren't too old. I pulled all those out and started the blocks over. And at that point, Amador County was really focused on the variety Zinfandel, and then there was a small amount of non-wine variety called Mission. And so that's really what Amador County was Zinfandel and a small amount of Mission. But there was no Cabernet, there was no Merlot, there was no Chardonnay, there was no Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, all of those, and I planted all of those varieties. And one of the varieties that I planted was Barbera there. And it turns out that Barbera is absolutely a stunning variety for Amador County. It's a high acid variety, but it's a warm area. So warm areas tend to make the grapes have somewhat of a lower amount of total acidity when you crush them and ferment them. The very first vintage, the second vintage of the Montevina Barbera, the 78, was absolutely stunning wine. And wherever we put it in judges and tastings and stuff, it always was the number one wine. And I recently had a bottle of that. My son Joel has more collection of Montevina than I have. And we had a bottle of the 78, and it was just stunning. And the acidity kept it together. I mean, that was kind of like, wow, you kind of did it, dude. Yeah. Choosing the varieties and planting them, and then making really good wine out of them.
Wow. Yeah. I love Barbera. So if we were to come into your home today, what would we find in your wine cellar? Is it samples of all the wines you've made over the years? Is it your, neighbor wines in this region, or do you extend beyond and have wines from other countries?
Well, in one corner, there's a huge stack of large bottles, 3 liters and 6 liters of some Montevina, some Sterling, because I used to be president of Sterling Vineyards, some large bottles of champagne, some gallon bottles of a Sauvignon Blanc that actually came from the vineyard around my house that my son made, and for some reason it was in gallon bottles with a screw cap on it, and it's right there on the floor. I see it, and then I have one huge wine shelf on one side with probably 25, 30 bins in it, and it's full of Bordeaux and a little bit of Burgundy, a lot of Napa Cabernet, some Amador County Zinfandel, sort of things that I haven't made, or there's a few bins with wines I've made. And then the floor, it's a pretty large wine cellar. The floor is cases, half cases, standing bottles of all the wines I've been making for all these people. And it's not just the 4 I mentioned. There are probably 25 different brands that I've made wine for that I've got miscellaneous bottles of. And it's not organized. You dig around and you find something. Oh, I don't remember I had that.
So as you were digging around, did you open something recently that drank really well?
for a recent birthday, there was my birth year, which is 1948, was 1948 Petrus. Stunning.
Wow. That's not just rummaging around and drinking something in your cellar. That's drinking something in your cellar.
It was amazing. It was in great shape. Some of the you start collecting wines, and people give you wines. Hey, good to see you, and you get a bottle of this or 2 bottles of that and stuff, and you don't really instantly desire to drink it, so you stick it on the shelf, and then some other wines get stacked on top of it, and they get old. My wine cellar is air conditioned, but the wines still age. The older wines, it's really tough on corks. All the bottles are stored properly. So the biggest challenge is corks.
Yeah.
But there's a great collection of wines. So like the early years of Davis Estates and the 2012s and 2013s, I've got quite a little bit of that wine. They're wonderful wine. In fact, Davis Estates makes a Cab Franc that is really good. Old vines right on the property, and that is just a beautiful wine.
So you've worked with so many different grape varieties. Do you think there's a such thing as a perfect variety?
Yeah. If I was able to do all this over again, I would have a very small winery in the basement of my house in Alsace, probably around Ribeauvillé, and I would have a nice small 1 or 2 hectare of Gewürztraminer outside of town, and probably a little bit of Pinot Blanc. But that's not going to happen. So I've actually never made Gewürztraminer, but I love Gewürztraminer. It's interesting. It's a variety I've never made. Perfect grape variety is probably Pinot Noir, because you can do so much with it. And if you understand the winemaking of Pinot Noir, which is very different than making other red wines, Zinfandel, Cabernet, Merlot, and all of that. But if you understand the production of Pinot Noir, and it's a good, relatively cool climate area, Pinot Noir is stunning to make, because you can make very good rosé out of it. You can make very good red wine out of it, normal red wine. And then you can do something that is really special, is you can do something that I call, in my determination, is special selection. So with Pinot Noirs over the years, we have gone through the barrels, because you never rack the wine. You make it, you put it into barrel, and it's always, in my wine book, it's always maybe 35 to 40% new French oak, a couple just of Coopers that I like to use, and the rest is older French oak that have come from the program anyway. So they're part of the club of the right barrels. And every barrel ages differently. It could be the same Cooper, the same age of the barrel, but this barrel number 1 tastes like wow, and barrel number 2 is, oh my God, it's unbelievable. So what we'll do is we'll select barrels that are really unique, and then keep watching them. And so at some point we have to really, cut. Yeah. And all the rest of them, they're really good wine, becomes maybe our regular, and then our special selection, and it is exactly what I said, it's specially selected, and that gets bottled as a special selection. And gets aged more.
And Pinot Noir is that grape that can do this. So,
well, part of it is the winemaking, because you don't rack the wines. Now, I've done it for a bunch of years with Cabernet. It's a little bit harder to do it with Cabernet, mainly because part of the winemaking scheme with making those bigger body Bordeaux varietals and Zinfandel and Syrah is you do rack the wine several times in its winery life. And pretty soon, because when you rack, you take all the wine and you put it in a tank, and now you got one wine again. And so you go back to the barrels, and the barrels have got to start aging different, and they don't change that much.
So, that's a really interesting answer to what is a perfect variety, or if there is one, because, I've just never thought of it quite in that way. Usually it's about grape growing that someone says, but I like that. Yeah. And Pinot Noir, come on. So you've made numerous wines. And as we know, one of the challenges of making wine is selling wine. So I'm wondering what your opinion on wine critics and scores is, and how that plays into maybe how how you've sold wine or not sold wine, or how you think wine sells in general based on that?
Well, there is, I've had clients that the whole world revolves around point scores. And so you get a great point score and you use it. You get a lousy point score and it just goes away. You don't even... So it's important, but I don't think you can sell all of your wine on point scores. Now, I've had clients that totally disagree with that. I've had clients that want to be able to sell their wine because it's who they are. We are so-and-so and so-and-so, and okay, fine. We spend a lot of money and build our winery, and we love having big dinners and whatever it is. Or I spent a lot of money at the wine auction and stuff. So there's a lot of ways, but if you are going to have a large volume brand, point scores are good, but they're not the whole key, because you have to have the relationship with people out there in some other state, with a distributor. You're riding around in cars, you're going into a restaurant, you're meeting with the somm, or you're meeting with the wine buyer or whatever. You've got to have the personality and the respect for their operation. You don't show up at 6 o'clock at night trying to sell wine at a fancy restaurant. So you got to understand what you're doing, and you slowly build relationships with people that they're doing a lot for you because they are buying your wine. You got to return a little bit. You go and spend some money in the restaurant, or if you're in town, or if they like to ski and you put together a ski event in Aspen and you have them come and join you. I mean, it's a mutual respect that becomes your interest in trying to sell the wine. I mean, I have something that I put a lot of effort into, and I'd like to sell it to you, and let me tell you about it, and tell me about you.
Right. So it's much more than the scores, although they play a good part if you get a good score. Good score. So, quick question for you, if you can. Red, white, or rosé?
Used to be all red. In fact, when the guy that really got me into the wine business, because I actually studied architecture at USC when I was a kid and almost got killed in the first Watts riot, and then I moved to Davis and started nothing. I took a course, Introduction to Wine for Americans, taught by Maynard Amory, the famous person. And I met Darryl Cordy Brothers in Sacramento, who is still a very close family friend. And I went to his store, mainly because to buy raviolis, love raviolis. And Darryl came up, and I was sort of looking at the wines, and I was a poor college student, and met Darryl, and what are you doing? I'm in college and stuff. And within several weeks, he brought 53 Lafite, some late 40s Tokai Azu 5 Putanos. I'm sure there was a bottle of Montrachet or something like that and stuff, and came to dinner at our house. And and our cooking at that time was not very sophisticated. Wow. It could have been baked potatoes with hot dogs and cheese in it, and just started a long relationship. And Darryl sort of got me into the wine thing just because he started to show us stuff that I wouldn't have seen. My dad wouldn't have had it on his table. I mean, he was making millions of cases of wine, and was all sort of I don't want to say Dago red, it was better than that, but so it was Darryl got me into the wine business. And what was your question?
You got sidetracked, but red, white, or rosé? So you said it was originally red.
It was originally red because there's so much interest in the red, and sherry. And that was through Darryl. And then got into the whites, and I think at some point in your life of drinking red wine, you sort of burn up all the receptors in your head and how much red wine you can really drink. So I look at red wine. I love drinking the red wines I make, and there's always 1 or 2 open bottles on the at our house. And they'll be there for 2 or 3 days, because I'm not drinking 4 or 5 glasses of red wine at night unless I have guests in or something special, and I've got a great bottle of Pinot Noir. Then all things are off. So my wife hates Chardonnay. So the white variety is Gewürztraminer, Sauvignon Blanc. Did I say Sauvignon Blanc? Pinot Blanc, and no Chardonnay.
Well, there you go.
But I make a lot of Chardonnay.
Well, and Chardonnay can be delicious.
Yeah.
So you were a red drinker, now we're more white. So I'm curious, you were saying that your first meal with Daryl Cordy, who is, sort of the encyclopedia of everything Italian, was more unsophisticated food. But now that you have been in the industry a long time and your cooking skills have improved, or your eating out skills are honed, how do you approach food and wine pairing? Do you think that there are rules that we follow, white wine and fish, red wine and meat? Do you look for other things that you follow as rules, from acidity or tannins or something? Or do you just see what's open?
Well, there's a piece of, if there's going to be a veal chop, why not go get a bottle of Pinot Noir? I mean, if you're going to go to that level of food, and I love cooking veal chops, and there are so many wines. Zinfandel, I mean, for years I was known as one of the kings of Zinfandel in California. So the things that, that sort of barbecue wine, and then we lived down in Arroyo Grande in San Luis Obispo County, and that was the tri-tip land. And, so you got red wine that just goes, it's got to be a little bit more grippy red wine. So Syrah, Petite Sirah, great wines to have with that. Mm-hmm. If it's chicken, we're having a bottle of white wine. If it's on the weekend, this weekend's going to be cold, but if it was a weekend and it was sunny out, we have beautiful alley of trees in front of our house, nice table out there, have lunch with Vicky and a bottle of Gewürztraminer.
So in a way, you're following sort of the traditions of red wine with meat and getting spicier wines with bigger foods and white wines. And I think those are pretty good guidelines for people to follow. I mean, why not? But now you make a lot of different wines, and we can focus on Calla Lily or one of the other brands you work with. But for someone who hasn't tasted your wines yet or tasted these wines yet, what do you think they're missing out on?
Well, one of the things we didn't just talk about is rosé. So I'll go back to what they're missing on this. But what's interesting with rosé is, white Zinfandel was such a big category. Mm-hmm. And at Montevino, we made quite a little bit of white Zinfandel. It was dry, and Sutter Homes was slightly sweet. Their brand became huge. Montevino became moderate in size for white Zinfandel. We should have called it rosé, because this whole popularity of rosé now is white wines with a little bit of color in it, and they're well made. And we made white Zinfandel really well. It's just that it was a terminology that we didn't really the consumer was a little odd with it. So I think rosé is continuing to grow as a factor in the wine business. What are they missing in the wines I make? I think the wines and all the people that I work with, from the cellar crew, the equipment that we have, the barrels that we have, the viticulture, not so much, I don't want to use the word demand, but the viticulture that I want. It doesn't have to be that there's not a blade of grass in the vineyard on top of the soil that's out of sync. I mean, I think you're wasting money. But canopy management, I don't want to see burnt berries. Obviously, we're in a drought year here, so we're giving the vines water kind of earlier than we normally would. I want to keep the vines healthy. It's the vineyards that I get to work with, and also the vineyards that I don't have to work with, and great cellar crews that you treat like normal people. And I've taught so many people how to make wine. That's really kind of cool. It's not do this, don't do that, but no, it's kind of like, okay, here's how we're going to do it. And there are several people right now I'm training. And I don't think they think it is training. I mean, you get plenty of lead on the rope when you work with me once that the way that I want the wines made, and they know when to ask questions. That's probably the biggest thing is that really what you wanted? Kind of thing.
Yeah. So getting a real expression, wines that represent places and a company that respects the people. Right. That's what you're getting in these wines. And you were talking a little bit about being in a drought now, and that, what it's looking like right now in the vineyards. And I'm wondering, we know every vintage tells a story, but how much vintage variation are you seeing year to year? Do you see more commonality, or do you see more consistency or more difference, in groups of years or year to year?
Well, so this last harvest was my 52nd harvest. So I started very young.
Wow.
At a winery just down the road here, Inglenook, that my dad ran at the end of his career. And so I was young. And we were here for a little while in Napa Valley and then moved up to Amador County. And in Amador County, one of the varieties I planted was Sauvignon Blanc. And for sure, we wouldn't pick any Sauvignon Blanc until the start of the third week in September. Mm-hmm. Now in Amador County, same vines, same viticulture, same everything. They're picking them the third week of August and the fourth week of August. That's climate change. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the amount of frost when we were here, living here in the 70s, one of the more famous series of frost was like 22 continuous days of frost, and the worst day was the last day. Mm-hmm. Of frost in the springtime decimated the vineyards. We very seldom have any frost anymore. That's climate change. Mm-hmm. Rainfalls is obviously very important. It wasn't only 3 years ago that all the reservoirs in the Sierras were going over, and we were totally out of control on the amount of water. Mm-hmm. This year in the Sierras, very little here in St. Helena. The rain gauge at my house since October 1st is parked at 12.2 inches. Wow. Normally we would be 32 to 40 by this time of year. So all those factors. So I think that the climate change has changed. We have switched varieties. We've switched rootstocks. Mm-hmm. Cabernet is very important here because it's a moneymaker for everybody on all sides of it. And it grows very well, even in the perspective of climate change. There's some things we can do viticulturally-wise to help with the climate change. But it was only 2011, that's not many years ago, that we did not have a good vintage because it was a wet vintage. Mm-hmm. Starting, September the 15th, it started to rain. And the sugars didn't come up, and the grapes got juicy, and so we do have.
Right. So it sounds like, obviously there's been great change over 50 years, which you've seen, and it's almost like an arrow going in one direction, as things change, but then there's little nuance in between, and of course, each year will give something different. So are there any signs or predictors you look for that are going to tell you what a vintage might be like?
Well, at this point, it's flower right now. We are in. I just took photos of the vineyards at Calla Lily yesterday for that talk I just did, and the little clusters are in 100% flower. They're really kind of gorgeous because you're watching the caps come off. And have you ever smelled a grape flower?
No.
It is the most ethereal smell you will ever smell. Very faint, but it's definitely there. So you've got all these little teeny things that look like the little corn husk that Tom, what was his name? Tom Cruise was eating in the movie Big.
Tom Hanks.
Tom Hanks, yes. and they're flowering right now. In just a couple days, you'll see the berries. And then you go out and you tap the bottom of the bunch, which is called shatter, because some of them, there's too many little potential grapes there. And you'll start to get an idea of how many grapes you're going to have there. There's many stages to go.
Sure.
So if you have the water, you're watering now to protect the vines. Our weather's been good. On a schedule of normally this would be happening this time of year, we're right on schedule with the farming.
So at this point, you're looking at it saying, all the signs and predictors are telling me we're in line for a good harvest. Yeah. But we have a long way to go. And Mother Nature might not be so nice. We don't know. She hasn't been so nice lately.
So we've got a long ways to go. And there are a lot of factors. We're in a little cool snap right now, which can affect flowering some. But it wasn't so cold this morning. It was 46 or something.
It's not too bad. Yeah. Not too bad. So I'm curious, you've been doing, you said 52 harvests. Have you gotten to the point where you talk to your vines? Do you go into the vineyard and are you talking to them, or?
Well, no, there's no reason to talk to. They know me and I know them. You know, I think it's more so with the people that I work with is having them respect the equipment, the grapes, everything that you're trying to do. Like, you know, don't do that because you know that's like a bad jujubes that you're giving the thing. I mean, I don't say it that way, but. There is this just trying to do it correctly, and there are a lot of different ways to make wine, but we're all basically using the same thing. If you're going to scramble an egg, you can do it the French way or the American way, and I'm sure there's a way they do it in South Africa that's different, and in Italy that's different, but the same thing is we're still scrambling that egg, and it's going to look fairly similar on the plate at the end. So. Right. You know, Italian winemaking is fascinating. The very precision and the very analytical that Bordeaux has become. Mm-hmm. Here, since a lot of what happened in the late 70s and 80s, people getting into the wine business that really didn't know about it. And they just, you know, they were interested and either had the money or just the interest or something. Right. And they just wanted to make wine, and their first wines were really kind of lousy, and they had to figure out how to really make it right. So there is a lot to it, but I call it, it's not cooking, but I'm taking a grape and turning it into the finished wine, and I've done it enough that I'm able to look ahead at stuff. I think it was sort of the genesis of your question is this going to be a great vintage? Right now it feels just fine. We're just short of water, like a Calla Lily. We have 2 reservoirs. And something we don't normally do is move water from one reservoir to the other. Well, we have because we never got any natural runoff this year, but we have enough water to farm normally.
That's great. And to my second part of the question about talking to the vines, I guess you're just so intimately familiar, you just have a silent language with them. At this point.
You know, and there's other things that you can do. And ones that I always remember so well when I was up in Amador County is a couple of vineyards, Little Zin and Big Zin, that were across from the winery. They're cute little, maybe 3-acre vineyards. A little bit of a knoll to them. Spring morning, it would be like maybe 4 weeks ago. There'd be a little bit of dew on the vines. You'd be on a tractor going up and down the road, and the sun would come up over the hills away, and it would shine through the leaves, and those young leaves are green-yellow, and there'd be a little bit of dew on them. So you had this sparkle. And beautifully, and it
talking to you in a way.
Oh yeah, no, yeah. I mean, they were talking to me, going like, "Hey, I'm looking really good," you know.
So, of all your wines, if space aliens were to land in your property, which of your wines would you want to welcome them with or present to them?
Space aliens. Well, I think if they liked red wine, I would do this 2016 Calla Lily Cabernet, which is a blend of Cabernet Merlot, Cab Franc, and a little bit of Malbec. We grow all those varieties. We grow Petite Verdot also, but we didn't put it in this plant because this wine is a wine that we create each year because we grow all 5 of the Bordeaux varietals. Mm-hmm. And we use what we want to make the style of wine. And there's years that we don't use any Petite Verdot. There's years that we use all the Petite Verdot and we don't have enough. I mean, it's that kind of thing. But all of the wines for Calla Lily are basically Cabernet Sauvignon. They're usually 80 to 90% Cabernet. And then we use Cab Franc, stitches the wine together. Merlot takes the weight out of the Cabernet and makes it a little bit fruitier. And the Malbec, when we use it, adds a little bit of spice in the nose.
So it sounds like a nice, well-rounded red to welcome aliens.
And if they were into rosé, I'd probably do the Lauer Rosé of Pinot Noir. And if for some reason the aliens really like Pinot Noir, then we'd be over Bricoleur with their Russian River Valley Pinot Noir.
I guess it depends on what property they land on. So when you were little, what did you want to be when you grew up?
An architect.
And that's what you did. That's what you studied.
That's what I studied. And then I left USC and went to Davis. There's no architecture there. I got married very young. And still, my first date in high school was an 8th grader named Vicky Field, and she's my wife still.
Ooh, so I have to ask you, if you're planning a romantic evening for you and your wife, which I think that's wonderful, how many years you've been married or together, because you weren't married in 8th grade. She doesn't like Chardonnay. So what sort of wines do you open to set a romantic evening?
Well, one of the first things is probably a bottle of Veuve Clicquot and Cheetos. Have you ever done that?
I have not.
That is, if you want to be the hit at any party that you're invited to, just grab a regular Cheetos and a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. The label and the Cheetos are exactly the same color. All the other hors d'oeuvres that your host has prepared don't get eaten. They'll drink the champagne and they'll eat the Cheetos. So, we'll do that. What else would be, there would probably be an old, just in fact, last night we went to a restaurant before one of our grandkids' lacrosse game and had a beautiful bottle of Sancerre, Sauvignon Blanc. And it was just, I was surprised to see Sancerre on this wine list, and it was a beautiful Sancerre. Oh. And I love cooking veal. We do a lot of cooking, and we're in the restaurant business. We've got all these restaurants, and so we'll go to one of the restaurants and sit outside at Gott's, or our food sort of goes all over the map.
Yeah.
And a romantic place, go to Lake Tahoe, sit at the other end of our pier and have a glass of wine. We sold the yacht a few years ago, which is a hidden area of California is the Delta. And we had this beautiful boat in the Delta, and you could go from here to the Delta in an hour and a half, get on board with our dogs, go out about 45 minutes, drop the anchor, and float around the anchor in this all teak Grand Banks. It's just beautiful. And there's no other people.
So it sounds to me that like a romantic evening is easy for you to plan. It's just the setting and then the wines kind of fit. Sancerre, a boat, who knows? Right. Who knows? So when you're not working, how do you spend your free time?
Work.
Fair enough.
Oh, no. So this, this weekend, or 2 weekends ago, the very first weekend in May, the Chronicle, San Francisco Chronicle, put out an article maybe 3 years ago that said 10 places in California you didn't know existed. One of them was Etna, E-T-N-A, which is in, so I looked it up, it's in Siskiyou County. So we went there in the middle of the summer in our RV, and we were the weekend after the rodeo. And Etna is a very old town, 1860 or something like that. And it's in a large farming community. And it's hay and cows and horses, not many horses. And then they have 2 times a year, they have a rodeo. So we missed the rodeo twice. We were gonna go last year, but COVID blew that out of the water. So we went to the rodeo this year, and it was just a classic of living the cowboy life. The announcer that was, I think, quite famous because he couldn't shut his mouth up. And it was very patriotic, and the veterans and the horses and the cowboy life. And
very Americana.
And it was just great. And we were able in this RV park we stayed in, really close to the arena, so we could just listen to the whole thing. And then Sunday we went over and actually were at the rodeo for maybe an hour and a half and stuff. And I sat next to a real character on one side, and on the other side, my wife was talking to some people, and they produced a dog, which was a Scottie, and we have 2 Scotties, and the dog was from the same litter as our dogs.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So exploring all the bounty that you're living in is how you spend your free time when you do, but you're working with so many different brands. So I'm wondering, when you look back at your career, what would you say is one of your proudest achievements?
Well, we made Montevina really work, and then the family side of that ended. And then to make Corbett Canyon Vineyards, because it was really the Lawrence winery when it was purchased by Glenmore Distilleries. So I was hired by Glenmore Distilleries to run Lawrence. Got rid of all the wines, made some staff changes, but I didn't throw everybody under the bus, and changed it to Corbett Canyon Vineyards. And literally within 12 months, our annualized sales were 100,000 cases a year.
Wow.
Because we did a wine, Chardonnay, really good Chardonnay from the area, that was in a liter. a liter bottle.
Very
and
smart.
And the motto was, we got the liter, G-O-T-T, the liter.
Very funny.
And then, so it was making that work. That was very prideful, and I spent a decade and a half at Seagram, a little bit more politics there. And then when it was time was up at Seagram, and then I started what I do now, and I get to use the architecture piece, although I am not the architect of these winery projects, but I can look at them from a global point of view because of all the wineries that I've built and make them work. And we're just getting ready to do another new one. And first, that winery, we thought we were going to only make 4 wines, and now we're making 19 to 26 different wines.
Oh my God. Well,
So the winery's going to change a little bit.
Yeah, so Proud Achievements, you have many to come, but really a marked career. So, I mean, it's hard to pick just one success. And I'm curious if you can complete this sentence for me. A table without wine is like?
No fun.
And now I want you to imagine a scenario. We're sitting at a table, as we are, and we have your wine sitting on the table. And there's an empty seat. Who from any walk of life would you wish you could share a bottle of your wine with?
2.
Okay. You can
Andre?
have 2 seats.
Andrei Chelichev and Dom Perignon.
Ah. I like
you see
that.
stars in the glass. And Andrei Chelichev, which I knew, not real well, but I definitely knew him. And it just I was a kid when I knew him. I know I already had a winery and was interested in wine and stuff. And he'd say, you would just trying to act like you were intelligent. No. Think about it, So he had the practical experience, and when I have some of that, of why we do the things we do,
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, if you were going to a deserted island, what 3 wines would you take with you?
Pinot Noir, Pinot Gris, and Sauvignon Blanc. I got to keep Vicky happy or I'd be in trouble.
That's true. Very true. Very true. I've got one more question for you. Well, a couple more, but we all have or receive advice over the years. You've met numerous people. You've been in this business a long time. Is there a piece of advice someone gave you that you apply towards your life or your work ethic or something that you could share with us?
Well, I would think it would really be, I think it's the voice that speaks to me in my head, is try to enjoy what you're doing. And if you're in some situations you don't enjoy and you kind of bitch about it the whole time, you're probably making your life more difficult.
Yeah, no, that's good. I always say, have fun until you're not having fun anymore.
Yeah.
So I like that.
As my grandmother used to say, isn't it fun to have fun?
I like that. Well, we're going to have fun with one more thing. We're going to play a little bit with wine and music, just pairing how these wines make you feel music-wise. So, as you mentioned earlier, we're sipping on the 2016 Calla Lily Ultimate Red. What does that make you think of?
The Blue Daniel Waltz.
Ooh. And then we've also got an Audax. Did I say that? Audax.
Audacious. That's actually in honor of the early settlers here in the valley in the 1880s that were audacious enough to go into the grape and wine business.
So, what song goes with Audax Napa Valley?
Was it Aretha Franklin that sang Who's Zoomin' Who?
Oh.
And the reason I say that is that it was always been a great party music when you had the whole cellar crew and the office crew and all of that, and everybody was drinking, obviously, and you're having barbecue out in the parking lot and stuff. It's just a great dance music. And it's not, I don't know that the wine is one that you dance with, but it is a beautiful wine, and it zooms its character in the glass.
That. What about your Veuve Clicquot and Cheetos pairing? Because let's have a trifecta here.
Probably all be Otis Redding on the dock of the bay, right?
I love it.
Yeah.
And last but not least, the wine you said that you have a true love for but have never made, Gewürztraminer.
Oh, Gewürztraminer. It would probably be another Strauss waltz. I don't know all the names of them, but in my gym at home, I've got tons of, Pandora music and stuff, and there always is this collection of classicals, though I don't usually play classical music when I exercise. But the Strauss waltzes and are just always so...
I like that.
Yeah.
With a little gewurz. Because
none of them are sad.
That's true.
You listen to the Blue Daniel Wall, and you can just see the river go by. And I've been on it as a kid.
That's great. So, Cary, I'm wondering, you have traveled the world, you've explored so many wines and regions, but is there one wine region in the world that is at the top of your list to go visit or explore?
Well, I would say one of the things is the way it was on one trip we did to Burgundy, and I forget all the people we were with. It was a corporate trip, and we went to see a small Burgundy producer, and we walked in his vineyards. An older guy. We were with Daryl, and his Clos, a walled-in vineyard in a very old, classic, 3-story French house, a gravel courtyard, and a little winery across the courtyard, and then in the basement. So we went and met with him, and he said, "Let's walk the vineyards." In front of us, there were 2 guys with rakes raking the soil. As we walked through the vineyard, and behind us there were 2 more guys raking up our footsteps. And so we did that, and he got kind of a kick out of it, but the workers really honored him, and the vineyard was just the little teeny vines, and they had a couple.
Yeah.
Well, it's winter, so there was no grapes on the vines. And then, you want to taste some wine? Sure. So we walked downstairs, and first underneath the house was the white wines. And so we walked downstairs, we each have a glass, he's got a thief. I'm pretty sure it had to be a glass thief. And we taste something here, and then we walk over the post holding up the house over there, walk around that, and you're obviously in a basement.
You're making me want to be there.
And then he stops, and we're behind him, and we're sort of in not a very large space. He stops. And he turns around, and he goes sideways like this, and he gets as far away as he possibly can from a barrel of wine that's sitting right there. So his butt's up against this barrel over here. And he goes around. And he looks at us and says, "Come here." And so we all did the same thing. We all got as far away as we could from this barrel and got on the other side. Got a shit-eating grin. He said, pointed at it, and he said, "Montrachet."
So you want to go back to Montrachet and relive this? I felt like I just lived it.
Well, that was just such an honor for the wine. Honor for the vineyard, and honor for the wine, and
I love it. Well, if somebody wanted to they won't have quite that experience if they come here, but they can come and taste your wines and have their own experiences. Maybe they won't butt up against a barrel. But if they want to come visit, you mentioned earlier that you have a tasting room. How can they find out more information about visiting your wineries?
They're all on the websites. They all have very active websites, and you can start your visits there. And it's the way you visit most of the wineries now. I mean, we're all we're obviously most of the wineries are back to somewhat very good number of guests can come to the wineries, and we're booked. I mean, the people have this pent up demand. And if you make a special request, sometimes you get to meet with the winemaker. I love talking to people and to taste out a barrel with people, because you have them eating out of your hand. You can tell them anything. And, obviously I'm not going to lie, but there is, I remember a tasting I used to do when I had all these Chateau Ferret barrels for a brand called Pillar Rock. And in the chime of the barrel, so the stave comes out and ends. And Chateau Ferret barrels have that crossboard across the end of it. And you can see the toasting on a lot of the coopers, you can see the toasting level, what it's like on the inside of the barrel, just because the way the thin staves are made. So there's a little bit of the barrels, all the staves have been toasted. And on Chateau Ferret barrels, you usually can see just a little bit of that. And to taste barrels with people and show them the color of that, and that it was a new barrel or a used barrel, or this one has a little bit more, to take people through and talk them through a barrel quality tasting is, you own them. They're.
Well, you heard it here, people. Make a reservation and you might get Cary Gott to sit down with you and take you, well, not sit down with you, take you into the cellar.
Yeah.
So, Cary, thank you so much for joining us on Wine Soundtrack. It's been really fun listening to your stories. I mean, I could listen on and on and on, but gotta end it. But I'm gonna enjoy your wine now.
Cheers. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to a new episode of Wine Soundtrack USA. For details and updates, visit our website, winesoundtrack.com.